Ready to go. Hey everybody. My name is Kyle Newsome, and I'm the director of SwiftTO. SwiftTO is a not-for-profit community building organization that I started last year, first and foremost to run a conference this past summer, but we have other initiatives like helping record and distribute talks from meetups like Tacow. But today I'm going to be talking about a transparency report on how the conference went and what we learned. So we've got quite a lot to go through today. I'm going to try to take you through in chronological order from inception, planning, all the way to the end, conclude with financials, the survey results we got back from the conference, and some lessons learned for the future. So why talk about this? Well, I'm enthusiastic to share the knowledge, and I would love to help us understand our own community a little bit better. And I would love to also empower others who might be interested in running events like this themselves to maybe get a little information about how it went for us. So it started with some inspiration from the Functional Swift conference that was held in 2018 in New York City. It's a fairly small conference. I think it's about 120 people or so just in this room. They got a space from Betterment, and I think this is just their kitchen space. We all set up in there. They recorded the talks, they put them online, very small budget, no swag, nothing like that. And I think one of the things that really inspired me about this in particular is that it just, like the simplicity of bringing passionate people together. And I really believed like we can absolutely do something like that in Toronto. Like there's tons of people in the Toronto community doing iOS development. We have no conferences whatsoever right now. I believe we can bring 120, 150 passionate people together to run a conference. So I started talking with NS Coder TO about starting up meetups downtown again, because it was just sort of, there were some running in Mississauga, but that was about it. So I was interested in both kicking off NS Coder TO again downtown, but also spearheading a conference as well too. So I sort of partnered with NS Coder TO to do that. So we started talking about getting a conference going, running events again, got a website up and running and got ready to make an announcement that we were going to do a conference. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the core values that we established before we announced the conference that I think explains a little bit of what shape it became, because we weren't ultimately trying to copy exactly what the Functional Swift conference was doing. It just sort of kicked off some inspiration. So number one, affordability was a really important thing. We wanted to try to be as price sensitive as possible so that it was within everybody's budget, whether you were paying out of your own pocket or whether it was coming from a company. We wanted everybody to feel like it was within their reach. And we did think about making it entirely free, but we thought that $0 was a little bit risky. You also just don't know if people aren't going to show up because there's no really like financial commitment on their part. But there's other reasons as well why we ultimately didn't go with $0. Convenience was a huge thing for us. Traveling to another city to go to a conference in itself is quite expensive. So it was really about getting something like downtown Toronto, very close to the subway line, GO train, etc. Covering our speakers' travel expenses. This was an important value, and this sort of ties into, again, why we couldn't necessarily do a $0 price for the conferences. We wanted to pay for the travel expenses of all of our speakers. And inclusivity was a really important value that we held as well too. And that really even came down to things like the food choices ultimately, because we didn't want to just like pick a one size fits all food and then exclude people who are vegan or have other types of dietary restrictions. So we wanted to have a food option that made sure everyone could be included. So with pretty much those core values and a website, we announced that we were going to be doing a conference in the summertime and sort of hitting that point of no return now where the gravity of everything that you need to do really starts to set in. And we really had a lot of stuff to do and figure out still, right? We had planning, marketing, sponsorship seeking, speaker seeking, venue seeking, venue seeking was really one of the most important things we need to figure out as soon as possible, because that would tell us what our capacity would be, what the date would be, and some idea of some of our initial fixed costs. Now, very early on in the process, I reached out to Ahmad Nasri, who has run quite a lot of events in Toronto. He's worked with Full Stack TO, he's run the serverless functions conference, he runs the Tech Masters chat Slack group. I think they have a meetup every once in a while too. So he's very experienced in being involved in the Toronto community. So I reached out to him and said, hey, I want to run this conference. Can you give me some ideas of what sort of things I should look out for? And he was really enthusiastic to help me. We talked a lot through his Tech Masters chat Slack group about like even how to price out sponsorship tiers, as well as like food and all sorts of other things. And actually at the time he was working for TELUS. He's the CTO of NPM now, but he was working for TELUS at the time. And I was telling him about my venue seeking problem and said, hey, you should consider doing it in TELUS's space. I'll put in a word for you. And that is the route we ended up going. We actually could see some pictures from the functions conf that was held in that same space in 2018. And it looked really good to us. We knew that this would exceed the kind of capacity we thought we might need for the conference. And that really, I think, kind of raised the bar as well for what this conference could be for us as well too. So with our venue and our dates determined, and we got the space for free, thank you very much, TELUS, we had some other very key things to figure out. And I'd say there's sort of 3 key pillars of conference success: getting attendees, getting speakers, and getting sponsors. And I find that you really can't work on like just one of these pillars at a time. You really have to be thinking about how you're building them all simultaneously, because they really feed into each other. Like attendees aren't interested in coming unless there's speakers, and speakers may not be able to come unless there's budget to cover their travel expenses. Sponsors may not be interested until you have enough attendees, and it kind of goes, it's like a 3-way chicken and egg kind of problem. But we did have TELUS as our first sponsor ultimately, which probably meant we needed to think a little bit about tackling one of the next 2 pillars. Speakers probably being even more important, so we could start incentivizing attendees to buy tickets. And luckily we got a little bit of community help with that. The day we announced it, Heath sent, I think, multiple tweets out to people that he was interested in seeing come to the conference. And sure enough, a few people responded who actually ended up speaking at our conference. Paul Hudson expressed some interest. Chris Ching ended up also submitting a proposal for a talk. And this was definitely a big flag to us. Like when we saw this, oh, Paul Hudson is maybe interested. Hey, we should maybe reach out to him and see if he'd like to be our first announced speaker. And he did ultimately sign on for us, which was fantastic. So we were ready to announce a couple of speakers. We had a venue, we had a date. It was time to start selling tickets. And from there, we still had a lot of work to do. Sponsorship seeking still, speaker seeking, budget planning, trying to do regular marketing on Twitter and email, running NS Coder events to try to continuously promote the conference at those events. And I actually even ended up developing a functional programming talk and gave it at 2 places, including at Tacow, to try to continue to promote the conference. So this is what our sales looked like from the beginning until the very end. And it was really nice to get that boost of ticket sales when we announced it. When we first announced it, we had like an email sign up on our website so people could start expressing their interest in buying a ticket for this. So we emailed everybody, we sold some tickets the first day, but you can see right after that, like it dropped off significantly and stayed like that for quite a while. We were sort of maybe getting probably less than a ticket sold per day for the next month or so, which was a little bit nerve-wracking, I have to say. We had a goal in mind of getting about 150 speakers, and maybe in the first month we had a little over 30. So we really had a long way to go still. And all through this period where the sales aren't so high, we were still trying things. We were still sending out emails communicating on Twitter regularly. I was doing talks, running meetups, and it was having like a little bit of an effect every once in a while, but sometimes I'd do something and I'd see no sales that day. So I didn't necessarily see a lot of feedback from that. But what we did see feedback from was when the early bird ticket sales were about to end. And we started sending out some reminders for that a week in advance, got a boost. And then when it came really close to the day, we saw a massive boost of sales. Such a massive boost, we actually hit our goal by the end of the early bird ticket sales, which was fantastic. It kind of eased our minds a little bit that the conference was going to be what we wanted it to be. And you see some other boosts there at the end, but those actually were no real marketing efforts on our point. We really stopped even trying to sell that hard after we hit our initial goal. There were so many other things to focus on as well too, but it was great to see we continued to sell general admission tickets without even trying. So we had met our attendance goal. That was fantastic. There was a little bit of relaxation there too. But again, still a lot of work to be done. We still had sponsorship seeking to do. Started figuring out the conference badges and the emoji stickers that you could put. We were letting people customize their stickers and running back and forth with the print house to try to figure out how those badges would work. Reviewing the remaining speaker proposals. Later on, very close to the conference, we also managed to get enough budget based on new speakers, new sponsors and general admission sales to get a photographer for the event, and also buy some T-shirts for raffle purposes, finalizing food orders, and probably a lot of other tiny small things I can't even remember right now. And from there, basically showtime. So this is a small slideshow where I get to take a breath. We did it. Fantastic. It was quite an accomplishment to see, and I can tell you that it was really nice to have that photographer there at the end of the day, because from my personal experience, the day just like flew by and I was so busy I didn't really get to enjoy it myself. So having a photographer there to capture it kind of allowed me to relive it and see how others experienced, and it was really fulfilling to see that after the fact. So I'm super glad we did end up getting a photographer in the end. Okay, so now let's get into review. Let's talk a little bit about the revenue, the costs, and what the survey results were. So this is what our cost breakdown looked like. The conference cost in total about $26,000. As you can see, food made up a huge portion of that, followed by speakers, AV, photographer. The only other noteworthy expense I think in here that was a little bit surprisingly large, and we'll keep talking about this a little bit later, is the raffle T-shirts were still quite a bit of the budget as well. More, twice as much as what the catering cost ultimately, and then swag wasn't too expensive after that. Variable cost per attendee. So we were very focused on the early bird ticket sales. Like, we weren't really thinking that much about selling general admission tickets. We really were all about the early bird ticket price. And then in some ways, the general admission price was just sort of like a distraction to try to incentivize you to buy an early bird ticket instead, because it was significantly cheaper. The general admission price was $90, early bird was $55, so it was a $35 difference. But you can see from an early bird ticket how much of it went towards food and Eventbrite, so that there was really only $9 remaining to put towards all of our other fixed costs. And an interesting thing about that, when you look at the general admission ticket, because it had the same variable cost, there was a lot more remaining afterwards to put towards our general admission tickets. So this is definitely some interesting food for thought for us on the future around pricing and how much is remaining after your variable costs to even go towards all the other fixed costs you have, speakers, AV, photographer, all those other extras. So looking at fixed costs without the variable costs included, so mostly like food and Eventbrite fees removed from our total costs. Speakers was the largest, then AV, photographer, but really I'm focused mainly on like our raffle T-shirts cost nearly 10% of our fixed budget, which is quite a lot, especially compared to the value that I felt they added in the end. And we'll come back to the raffle and the raffle t-shirts again. So revenue breakdown ultimately looked like this. Our sponsors accounted for over 50% of the total revenue we brought in, and then early bird and regular were about evenly split. But you can really kind of understand, especially with the early bird tickets, with how little was remaining to go towards all those other fixed costs other than those variable food costs, that the sponsors were really helping cover those fixed costs especially. So super quickly, I just want to say thank you again to our sponsors for making it possible. And survey results. So we sent out a survey at the end of the conference to ask people about their experiences, and this is what we got back. First of all, we asked people, how likely are you to recommend the SwiftTO conference experience to others? It was awesome to see that an overwhelming majority of people gave us either a 9 or a 10. In NPS score, Net Promoter Score terms, this is a 58% Net Promoter Score, which is phenomenally high. So that was really fantastic to see. Things we did well. I don't want to talk too much about these because I think how can we improve stuff is more interesting, but price, location, food, talks, breaks, pacing, badges, organization, the diversity and inclusion. It was nice to hear those things back. Let's take a little more time to talk about maybe what didn't work and how we could improve in the future. AV issues. I don't know how you don't have AV issues. We certainly put a lot of budget towards that, and they still inevitably happen. I have a few ideas that I'll talk about a little bit later about ways that we could maybe mitigate some of those problems. Breaks and pacing didn't ultimately work for everybody. Some people didn't find the food very tasty. Some people thought that they wanted more code-oriented technical talks. Some people talked about different preferred talk styles. And one thing that I thought was very interesting is that there was really no common theme. Like everyone was saying, oh, I want this style and this style isn't as interesting to me. It was actually quite different. Some people thought like one talk was the most valuable for them and someone else was maybe like, oh, I could have done without that talk. So it was interesting to see there was kind of a breadth of tastes out there. Coffee all day, we only had it at breakfast, but I understand now coffee all day is an important thing to people. Possibly adding something like workshops in the future or a kids learning program. Some people complained that they didn't get a t-shirt, which was very interesting because this t-shirt thing was like this thing we added at the end, as part of a raffle. But now I kind of see after the fact that when you give some people a t-shirt and don't, it's just like, it's not kind of equal anymore. Furthermore, when you have this raffle that people kind of have to like sit there and look at their ticket and wait for people calling out numbers, I don't think it's the most thrilling part of the conference experience either. So it was interesting to just see how that kind of made people feel when some people got t-shirts and others didn't. Q&A. Some people would have liked to have seen a Q&A. This was a tricky decision for us because we did think at one point we were going to have a Q&A, but ultimately chose not to. I think just because we wanted to try to control the pace, we didn't know what would happen with Q&A, whether it would sort of be unpredictable or whether some people would get more Q&A time and others wouldn't. We didn't want speakers to feel bad if they didn't get asked any questions and others got, say, asked a lot. And we just wanted to make sure that people didn't ask poor quality questions that weren't ultimately respectful enough to the time and effort that the speakers have put in to their talks. So certainly something we'll think about for the future, like how can we resolve, getting people some type of a Q&A session, but also make sure that it's a high quality, well-controlled Q&A experience. Comments that I looked a little bit overworked. True, I definitely did. I saw the pictures of myself after the fact too. I definitely looked overworked. And the raffle just didn't work for people, kind of similar to the no t-shirt thing, but I think just the pace and energy of the raffle wasn't super high. So I can understand that wasn't the best part of the day for people, especially at the end of the day, right after all the talks, but before the social, there was kind of this gap. So some other questions that we asked people, how important is price to you when deciding on a conference? Reasonably high. How important is the speaker lineup when deciding on a conference? also fairly high. How important is having opportunities for networking when deciding on a conference? People also think is fairly important. This one surprised me actually a little bit. How important is swag and other extras when deciding on a conference? I thought this was going to be like super low, like people just like, I don't really care that much, like it's nice. But it was somewhere in the middle actually. And I don't know if not getting a t-shirt affected anybody's response and they kind of emphasized the importance of those things a little bit higher. But it sounds like one of those things that's kind of nice. It's good for commemorating the event. It's not something you make decisions around, but if you got absolutely nothing to remember the event by, you might feel like you're just missing out on something a little bit. How important is free food and drinks when considering attending an event? This was actually a little bit lower than I thought it was going to be. I thought having food was pretty important to people so they didn't have to necessarily go and figure that out themselves. Another question we asked, if an event is not providing free food or drinks, how important is it that food and drinks are available for purchase at the venue? That was a little bit more important to people. So it does sound like it's not necessarily super important that the conference provides the food itself, but it should be situated somewhere where people can at least find access to food for themselves. What experience levels are you interested in attending events for? Overwhelmingly, we found that intermediate and senior experience levels are what our audience was interested in mostly. What kinds of events are you interested in attending? So probably not surprising that among people who attended a conference, that a conference is a type of an event that they're interested in attending, though still not 100% of people who answered the survey. But then following that, workshops, which is something that we don't have a lot or really any of in Toronto right now. And interestingly enough, coffee and code also was higher than talk night meetups like we're at right now. So interesting to hear a few other styles that people are interested in attending events for. So lessons learned. Food is expensive, and combined with trying to seek like the right quality level and get the right catering services and think about how quickly it's going to be to plate so that lineups don't accumulate, it just gets more complex from there too. I'm not sure that I realized how expensive and complex food would end up being. Early bird ticket prices were really key to early sales and marketing for us. I can't even imagine what it might have felt like to go through and not had that nice boost somewhere, over a month before the actual event, because it really just took a load off our minds and just let us focus, I think, really on just like making the event awesome for everybody who had signed up already, or for feeling like we really had to push the marketing side of it as much. So I think that early bird ticket prices are a really important marketing strategy. Get ready to put your salesperson hat on. This is a tough thing to do. It was definitely very difficult for me to kind of get the energy up sometimes, to hustle, to go out, to send cold emails, to follow up on those emails, to kind of accept rejection for sponsorship. It's not the same kind of feedback you get as like when you're programming all day. It's not something I think that I am the best at doing, but it's something that is really necessary. And there was even a point where I was thinking like, it would be a lot more comfortable for me to just take another contract over my evenings and weekends and make revenue from that and then just put that towards the conference, because at least I would enjoy doing that a little bit more. But I don't think that's an intelligent way to go about thinking about it. It's just, personally, as someone who is a developer, not a sales guy, it felt much less painful to code to raise the money over going out and reaching out to people. Giving your speakers an opportunity to do an AV test if they'd like. So this is an example of something that I think could maybe help with some AV issues. Just making sure you reserve some time that if speakers are interested in testing their setups, they can do that before having to get in front of everybody. Asking the venue who their number one preferred or most experienced vendors are for things like AV and catering, I think is a good idea as well too. Because you'll get a list of preferred vendors, but there could actually be quite a bit of a difference of experience level at that venue between, say, who they say their number one is or who is the most experienced versus who's just on that list. I think this maybe could have affected something like AV again too. The AV company that we worked with did have some experience there, but maybe not as much as the company they told me sort of later they were most familiar with working with. I only sort of heard about this later after I'd already determined who we thought we were going to use, but I think I would ask proactively in the future and try talking to those companies. Knowing your budget better in advance helps you plan better and get better prices, and I think just do better things for your attendees as well too. Things like the photographer and the raffle and the t-shirts came quite late in the process as we raised some more money from sponsorship and from general admission sales. We might have actually been able to get a more affordable photographer, although I was super happy with the job that the photographer did. We just were kind of in a rush to find someone, and we had someone available who was quite a bit more expensive than other photographers were priced at. And then even just things like the raffle t-shirt, like maybe we could have put that budget towards something completely different instead that would have been more value add for everyone. And to repeat myself, the raffle was ultimately very high cost, both in time and money, but I think ultimately delivered low energy and value. And I think that you need to be cautious of activities that are going to put like a lull or friction on the day for people. You know, we've got these high energy talks, and then we go into like this slow raffle where I'm reading ticket numbers off, and you know, a few people are coming up and getting books and t-shirts. I think it just sort of sucked some of the energy out of the room. And when you know also like that was 10% of our fixed costs, it's like we probably could have done something better with that money. So 2020 plans. I can't actually say much about our 2020 plans, but I can tell you about something that inspired me recently. I had the opportunity to go to another conference in Buenos Aires in November, the BA Swiftable conference, which was fantastic. I had a really good time. The organizers of this were actually running their first conference as well, and they did like a mind-blowing job. It humbled me so much to see everything they put into this. It was a 2-day conference, lots of great speakers, really great venue. I had a wonderful time at this, and it sort of leaves me between the two conferences that I've recently been to and been inspired by, which I think have differences from one another, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it does sort of leave me like, what direction would SwiftTO go if we were to do another conference? The Functional Swift Conference, I love the simplicity of it, but I also love sort of the grander, bigger feel of a conference like what BA Swiftable was. And given that we don't really have any conferences in Toronto at all right now, and that we sort of lean towards this theme of really trying to be inclusive, which I also think means like rather than having a smaller venue, we'd like to try to have as many people attend as possible if they're interested, that something more towards the bigger style is better for where SwiftTO is going. However, I still think we should actually do this kind of smaller style too. Like we don't have to have just one conference in this city. There's enough of us out there. So I don't know if anyone else is interested in running a conference in that style as well too, but I think we should maybe even think about having more style ones just like this. Like it's not as big of a planning deal to get something like this up and running over what BA Swiftable was. But I think for our purposes, SwiftTO, we may lean towards sort of this bigger, grander conference style. So that's basically where we are today. If your company is interested in sponsoring the next SwiftTO conference, please reach out to me. You can email me at hello@swiftconftO, on Twitter, swiftconftO, or you can speak to me personally on Twitter, Kyle New. That's the first 3 letters of my first and last name. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes?
So I know there are some international conferences this north.
Mm-hmm.
Have you considered bringing them here instead of like getting your own conference?
No, and I don't think we'll do that. Like, I'm interested in figuring it out and running it ourselves, and growing a team of organizers here that are interested in doing it. I mean, before this whole thing kicked off, I had thought one point, like, what if we did a Tri-Swift TO, if I could reach out to that organization. We didn't ultimately go that direction. I mean, what the conference became sort of evolved over time a little bit. I think we started with a fairly humble idea of what it would be, and then it grew to something bigger. Maybe if we'd had a vision for it being as big from the start, we would have reached out to an organization like that. But I kind of like the idea of us owning this within our own community a bit. Yes?
Your conference's tickets cost a fraction of what most conferences cost. Given that most people were probably expensing into their company, why not just jack up the price?
It probably would be more expensive in the future, especially trying to get a bigger gap between what like the variable costs are and how much you have to put towards everything else. I think it actually becomes very clear like what the difference becomes from that early bird price to general admission, right? From $55 to $90, we went from $9 left for fixed cost to $42. That's over 4 times as much, right? So definitely something I would consider in the pricing in the future, like how much is going towards the variable costs and how much can go towards everything else. It was probably cheaper than it should have been, but I still want to always keep the price under control to some degree. I also think that being break even like we were is not the right way to do things. It would be nice to have at least a little bit additional revenue left over. Like we had a tiny bit, which we put towards getting a Vimeo subscription so that we could put all the videos online. And we did the survey. After the survey results, we gave away an Apple TV and some more t-shirts. So we had a little bit for that, but after that we were like squarely break even really. But I think we would want to try and be a little more profitable than that, just so we have money to put towards other things ultimately. Yeah. Sorry, I'll go with you first.
Okay. As an engineer, when you had to put on a salesperson had to grab those sponsors, what was the biggest skill you realized you had to undergain?
Persistence is probably, and just not taking it personally is a tricky thing. I think persistence and just trying a lot more companies is probably what it took. I just didn't spend enough time on it ultimately, or I chose a select few and then I followed up with them. But I wasn't just like continuously trying to put new sponsors in my pipeline and just keep that machine rolling. So yeah, I think just like a steady machine of always seeking sponsors, continuously following up and being persistent like that, yeah.
Did other speakers catch wind of the conference, and given, I guess, the success of it, have they expressed interest in, even though they didn't participate the first year, in your inaugural year, have they come back to you and said, we would like to come by next year, now that you guys are for real?
For real, yeah. We've heard from some people. I mean, there were some speakers from outside of the city that were interested as well, that we just didn't have the budget to bring over ultimately. And we did even reach out to some of those people and say, thanks, we're really excited that you're interested in speaking at SwiftTO, but we just don't have the budget for this year. And it's very important to us to make sure we're covering our speaker travel expenses. We didn't really want to even get into a conversation with some of these people about like, hey, would you be interested in going a little bit of out of pocket for this? I just don't really want to go that direction with this. I'd really like to always make sure we cover travel expenses. But we have heard from some people from the international community, and there were people from the international community who we just didn't have the budget for this time, but would consider for the future. There's some people I would definitely reach out to who already expressed some interest, for sure. Yes?
Did you thought about doing a phone virtual conference with some speaker or something like that?
Sorry, you mean like a remote conference, like a live stream sort of, or?
To the speaker over outside?
Or sorry, for a speaker to like stream
Yes.
to the audience there? No, I haven't thought about anything like that. I guess that's one way that you could potentially get an international speaker without them having to travel. But I think that the experience of them actually being there is part of it, right? Like we go for the talks, but we also go for the networking to meet those people face to face. I don't think it would have been the same experience to have Paul Hudson stream to give his talk versus the presence he had sort of being there, talking to everybody, shaking hands, really getting to know and meet the community. I think that was a great part of the experience as well too, is actually having those people physically here to talk with as well. So yeah.
Why not just sell the t-shirts and people who want them?
Yes, for sure. Yes, definitely something we consider in the future as well too, is have the ticket price and then have the t-shirt price separately from that and then give people the choice. Yeah, we really didn't think about t-shirts until far too late. And then I tried to guess like what the right sizes would be for the raffle. So I have like 8 2XL Swiftio t-shirts back home that I just have nothing to do with. They'll probably just become like rags for cleaning stuff up. But it's much better, I think, yeah, to like let people make the choice and also get the right sizes. Like you just can't predict people's sizes properly either. Awesome, thanks very much.